Derek, it's always great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you guys, too.
Absolutely.
So for your podcast, Plain English with Derek Thompson, you did 2 different episodes so far on Ukraine. And we wanted to start with, you talked to a bunch of experts about what some of the potentially unpredictable follow-on effects of the war in Ukraine could be from a supply chain perspective, from an economic perspective. What were some of the top lines that you found there?
Sure. The thesis of that episode on Plain English was that war doesn't just include unintended consequences. War is unintended consequences. I don't think a lot of people assumed when Putin invaded Ukraine that we would see essentially the economic suffocation of the Russian economy. I mean, this is an unprecedented thing that is happening right now and is unfolding by the second. But some of the really interesting ripple effects that I didn't really anticipate until I started reporting out this episode include the food crisis that we could see. Ukraine and Russia combined for something like 20-25% of wheat exports to the world. There are 14 countries in the world that rely on Ukraine for more than 10% of their wheat imports. That includes a lot of countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. So if you see wheat export disruption because of this war, you could see hunger. You could see potential famines in some countries, I'm worried, in the Middle East, in Africa, and Southeast Asia. What do we know about hunger? It tends to create its own political knock-on effects. It tends to create its own political instability. The Arab Spring, all sorts of revolutions around the world have started because of rising food prices. So the ripple effect there to pay attention to is what if the trade is disrupted from Russia and Ukraine creates economic problems for countries that already have poverty and political instability, and we see flare-ups of political revolutions outside of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that's something I'm very worried about. Derek, you also called the financial suffocation of Russia terra incognita. This is something I, too, Krystal and I have been trying to wrap our heads around. Can you just describe for us what some of the follow-on economic effects might be? Because the Russian economy is not contained to just Russia. It's a, modern Western nation that does business with all sorts of people.
That's right. Just a key stat right there. I think something like 75% of the world's sunflower seed oil comes from Russia and Ukraine. So there's all sorts of, obviously the natural gas and coal, an enormous amount of the energy that's provided to, or that Europe uses, comes from Russia. The way that I think about this in the big picture, do you remember when Trump was elected and the comedian John Mulaney said, this is like a horse loose in a hospital? We've never seen anything like this before. You can't say, oh, I saw a bird loose in a hospital once. No, that's not a horse loose in a hospital. No one has seen anything like this before, so don't tell me you know what's going on. I kind of feel like this isn't like the horse loose in the hospital. This is like a rhino loose in the nuclear power plant control room. You're not just seeing something that's unprecedented. You're seeing something that's unprecedented that is proximate to a relatively unhinged leader in Vladimir Putin who has access to the world's second largest nuclear arsenal. This is a really, really scary moment. The other way that I think about this is that there's sort of 2 dimensions of this war. On the one hand, there's battlefield number 1. That is the ground in Ukraine. It's the land, it's the sea, the air in Ukraine where the literal battle is happening. What we've seen in the last 48, 72 hours is that there's another layer of this war, Battlefield 2, and that's the contracts and the policies that exist in the world of global finance and economics. And what the world has done essentially is said, all right, if you're going to try to siege Kiev, if you're going to try to besiege the country of Ukraine, we will economically besiege the country of Russia. You cannot trade. You cannot fly to Europe. You cannot offload your assets. Your central bank is essentially shut off. You can't take money out of your ATM. That's why you had all these lines and you had all this news about ATMs running out of cash, running out of rubles. The ruble itself has lost something like 30 to 40% of its value in the last 24 hours. I mean, this really is turning out to be something like an unprecedented economic crisis for a country the size of Russia. And while, of course, this is not my saying we shouldn't do this, like it's important to stand up to an autocrat invading a neighbor to say this is not acceptable. But I think it's worth pointing out that we do not know what the knock-on effects are going to be exactly in the next 72 hours, because this is a horse loose in the hospital. This is a rhino loose in the nuclear power plant control room. We don't know what comes next.
That's right.
Well, and I'm just looking at a new CNN poll that says 83% of Americans favor increased economic sanctions against Russia in response to the invasion. So there's huge public sentiment in favor of, essentially throwing the economic playbook at Russia. However, one of the things that you tease out is that strategy, not only is it unprecedented under, against a major G20 power, it also has risks. It's not clear that this ultimately is going to be the way to de-escalate and resolve this situation with the least human suffering. So talk about what those risks actually look like and entail.
Sure. The way I think about it is we have Putin in a headlock, but he has a gun to the head of the human race, right? Like, he has the ability to launch hundreds of nuclear weapons that would essentially end life as we know it. I'm not saying that to be scaremongery, and I certainly hope he doesn't do it. I think the odds of it happening are sub 1%, but these are the facts on the ground. I think it's important to, now that we've shown Putin our economic arsenal, to clearly illuminate an off-ramp. We need to find a way out of this. I talked to a military historian and political science professor, Paul Post, on the second episode that I did for my podcast, Plain English. That episode was called How Putin's War May End. And he made an interesting point. He said there's a term in political science called gambling for resurrection. Gambling for resurrection. That is when a military leader is so desperate that he or she does something completely crazy because their back is against the wall. I believe Otto von Bismarck in the 19th century, the German-Prussian leader of the late 19th century, called this risking suicide for fear of death, or committing suicide for fear of death. If the actor, Putin here, feels like death is proximate for him or his regime, he might commit the equivalent of geopolitical suicide, which, when you have a nuclear arsenal at your disposal, is suicide for a lot more than just Putin. I think for all those reasons, it's really important that we be clear about what the off-ramp here is. To tell Putin, tell people around him, if you do this, then these catastrophic sanctions will come down. If you go this far, these catastrophic sanctions will come down. We are willing to work with you so that you can save face, leave Ukraine, save your country, and also, by the way, save a piece of the global financial and trade system, because Russia is a big economy that is at the heart of a lot of supply chains and global networks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people have really understood. I mean, it's the 11th largest economy on Earth. Derek, you talk to these people with endgames. At this point, Putin has invaded. He has described, to me, painted himself in a political corner of the current Ukrainian regime is unacceptable. So what does an endgame look like, which he can live with and which we can live with?
That's a good question. Obviously, the endgame involves Putin getting out of the Kiev area, right? That's the most important. Stop besieging the capital. It would, I hope, involve him de-escalating significantly and moving his troops out of the vast majority of Ukraine. I'm a little bit concerned about the U.S. asking for something like removal of Russian troops from Crimea. I'm not a military expert here. I'm just saying, if you ask for Putin to essentially give back to Ukraine more than it had before the invasion, I worry about that extending the length of the war. I'm not sure what the best move there is, but my thesis here is, if we can get back to status quo ante 10 days ago, status quo ante 2 weeks ago, that would be a win for a lot of people. It would allow Putin to save a certain amount of face. It would certainly save the tens of millions of people who are a part of the Russian economy. It would save an aspect of the global financial system. And it would potentially save Europe from catastrophic escalation in penalties that might, or escalation in sanctions that might include Russia shutting off natural gas to Europe during a cold late February, early March period. So I think that probably has to be on the table for sure.
That's well said.
What did your military historian say about what he saw Putin's ultimate objectives here being? Because, I mean, obviously he's completely invaded Ukraine by all directions and all methods possible. Is he planning to stay in Ukraine? Is he planning to have a puppet government? Is he planning to occupy Ukraine the way that we did Iraq? What does this ultimate endgame look like?
Right. So we talked about 5 scenarios. I'm not going to walk through all 5 scenarios, but I will say that scenario 3 was what Professor Post called annexation. That basically means the conquest of Ukraine, and something like the end of the independent state of Ukraine, Ukraine being folded into an expanded Russian empire. That was the goal of Putin, say 5, 6 days ago, whenever this war started, what even is time. I think Post said that he imagined Putin had likely downscaled his ambition towards setting up a puppet government in Kyiv, conquering Kyiv itself, holding Kyiv with maybe, several tens of thousands of Russian troops, and essentially running Ukraine as an extension of the Russian Empire without conquering the entire country. At this point, given the bravery of the Ukrainian army, given what seems to be the suffering of Russian forces, I saw a statistic. I don't want to suggest that this is obviously true. I think it may have come from the Ukrainian government, and they have their own reason to exaggerate the cost to Russia. But it suggested that something like 4,500 Russian soldiers have died in the first 4 or 5 days of fighting. That is more than the total number of American deaths in Iraq in the entire 19-year history, 20-year history of that war. I believe only about 250, I don't mean to downplay it, 200 to 300 Americans died in the first year of the Iraq war. That means that Russia is essentially losing on a daily or multi-hourly basis as many troops as Americans lost in the entire first year of the war in Iraq. I mean, I think it's important to point out, as a piece of context here, that this war is not going well for the Russians. And hopefully that pushes them to the bargaining table, and we can end this horrible war. And frankly, take off these sanctions and allow the tens of millions of people in the Russian economy to not essentially face the next Great Depression for their nation.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, Derek, I was thinking about it. 15,000 Soviets were killed in the Soviet-Afghan war, and just those 15,000 was enough to spark a domestic backlash in Russia. So if they're on track at, some 4,000 or so, roughly, we don't exactly know the number, you multiply that by 2-3 years, this is a real sea change over there as well. Derek, we can't...
Well, you're talking about...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Very last point.
No, go ahead.
You're talking about that happening in a matter of 4 weeks, right?
Exactly.
You're talking about the equivalent of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan happening every month, right? So that's 12 Soviet invasions of Afghanistan a year. This may be proving very catastrophic for the Russians, and I very much hope that the appearance of the catastrophic invasion pushes Putin to the bargaining table.
Very, very well said,
That's
man.
what we all...
Everybody go subscribe to Derek's podcast. We're going to have the links down there in the description. Always appreciate you, man. Thank you for joining us.
Great to see you, Derek.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't appreciate you more. I mean, in these times, it's crazy. We both feel like we're like, oh my God, we have so much information that we have to break down. But look, that's why we do what we do. We can't do it without your support. We have a ton of new partnerships. I hope you guys saw. James Lee made his debut on the program. We have Matt Stoller. We have the Daily Poster. We got 2 more coming down the pipeline. So I think, or no, 3 more actually. So we'll have 6 active partnerships. All of that is enabled by you and your support for us with the premium membership. It gives us the editing power, the graphics power, and all that to support content which we love and to bring you as much as we possibly can. We were worrying. We're like, is this too much? But the more we post, the more you guys watch. So look, we will continue to do as you ask.
Yeah. And part of our goal with those partnerships is, it enables us to have really high quality content for you. So we're not just putting up stuff to put up stuff.
Exactly.
I really recommend, if you guys have a chance, if you haven't watched it already, go check out James Lee's piece on the MBA program and the way that it's sort of, the directions it's pushing our business leaders into, which is hugely significant for all of us. You may need a break from Ukraine coverage, so go and definitely check that out. We're very excited to have James on board. We're also excited about our live stream tomorrow night for State of the Union. Me, Saagar, Marshall, and Kyle are all going to be here at this table.
The big desk.
Yes, at the big desk. We got a couple of surprise guests for you, too. So before the State of the Union, after the State of the Union, all of these things are enabled by your support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We are so incredibly grateful. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.